So last week I was traveling and I had this big old carry-on bag for everything I might need when I was on the plane. I didn't want to just put my book right into this mess because then it might get bent, it might not look good. I grew up with a father who would read books and didn't even want to crack the spine. I'm not sure why, it was just one of his things. So book sleeve to the rescue. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a basic book sleeve. Great protection for all of your books. You can make these in any size. You can make them to hold tablets. You can use them for notebooks. For this one, I just put my notebook in there, also put my pen in there. So I just had to pull this out of the bag. Everything was nice and neat and in one place. I also have two patterns in my Etsy shop. One is for a book sleeve with a front pocket in 3 different sizes. Then I also have a second one with this super cute big bow tie. So this one has a pocket and the big bow. You can find the links to those below this video. They're all built upon what we're going to do today, which is the basic book sleeve with flexi foam and fabric. Who is ready to get started? Let's begin where we always begin, which is with the supplies. So for this simple book sleeve, we're going to need 2 pieces of fabric for the outside and 2 pieces of fabric for the inside. This is going to be one of the smaller ones. It'll be about 6 by 8 finished. So these fabrics are 7.5 by 9. And then we are going to use this flex foam that is fusible on one side. It's kind of hard to see, but you can feel it. And I am using a Pellon FF78F1 one-sided fusible stabilizer. I believe they make a 2-sided as well. I just prefer the one side, especially for this project. And the foam is slightly smaller than the fabric, so we're going to cut this to 7 by 8.5. Then we need a pressing cloth, which is basically a piece of cotton. You can probably just use a thin piece of cotton, or you can buy them that are called pressing cloths. Basically, it's a piece of cloth that we're going to be putting over top of the foam and the fabric. We're going to spray it and make it wet with this mister bottle, and we're going to press. That is what the directions say. You always want to follow your manufacturer's instructions, and we'll talk about exactly how to do that when we get to the ironing board. But that is what the water and this piece of fabric is for. This is a turning tool. It's going to help push those corners out when we're turning everything right side out. And then I definitely like to use fabric clips versus pins because we're working with the foam, which is pretty thick. So it's easier to just clamp everything together than to use pins. Now, one thing that some people will ask is, what about quilting it? You may have seen quilted book sleeves versus just a regular puffy or padded book sleeve. And the difference is whether you sew through. So this is an eyeglass case, and I use the same material for those. But I sewed, you can see all these stitch lines. So this is a quilted eyeglass case. You could do the same thing with the book sleeve. Doing all these stitch lines through the foam does compress the foam, so it's not going to be quite as padded as if we just iron it on and let it be. Plus, ironing it on and letting it be is just a little bit easier, and we are going for the quickest beginner method, get these things done. So these are the supplies we need, and the first thing we are going to do is we are going to take our 2 outer fabrics and we are going to fuse the 2 foam pieces onto the back. So let's head to the ironing board. So you want to feel for the fusible side of your foam. I'm going to turn my fabric so that the wrong side is up, and we're going to center this. Now we cut this a little bit smaller so that we're not going to have this thick foam in our seams. We might have a teeny tiny bit, but mostly our seam is going to be next to the foam. But we want to get this centered. So now we're going to turn that back over. So we have our fusible side here, and we're going to adhere that to the back of this fabric. Now the directions say to cover this with a pressing cloth. We have the iron on a wool setting, and now I'm just going to wet this. This is a cool little mister. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm getting it nice and wet. And part of the reason is so that we don't scorch the pressing mat, and also so that we can gauge how long we are pressing, because when we're pressing about the right amount of time, this will dry. I have my iron set to wool, and I always start in the center And you want to press down about 10 seconds, and then you're going to lift and move the iron. You're not ironing. The difference between ironing and pressing is the movement. Ironing, you leave the metal part down and you're going like this, like when you're ironing clothes. Pressing is when you're pressing down and then you lift and you move. Very important distinction, especially in quilting, but also in fusing foam. You want your iron to overlap a little bit because we want to make sure we get this bond nice and solid on the back of our fabric. And then it says to let it cool and then check the bond. I'm just going to make sure it isn't coming up. Always check the corners. If anything is going to be not bonded, it's usually going to be the corners. So if your corners are good, especially if you start in the middle like I showed you, you can assume that this is fused very nicely to that fabric. Now we're going to do the second one in the same manner. Now, one thing to note, you never want to iron on the foam. This is polyester, it will melt, so you always want to have it covered or be ironing from the fabric side of things. When we sew, I like to sew with the foam side up. Now you might notice this shifted a little bit, so it's not perfectly straight. Not a problem, it's going to impact a little bit how we sew. We'll just have to be a little bit more careful because we're going to go over the foam right there, but it's doable. You want to get this as even in the center of this fabric as possible. Now we have our outside fabrics and our lining fabric. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to go right sides together and we're going to sew the lining fabric to the outside fabric. Now, because I am using directional fabric, I want to make sure that I'm sewing this to the top short edge and not the bottom. Very important. I'm going to put those right sides together. I'm going to flip it over because, as I said, when I sew, I like to have the foam on the top. It makes your presser foot move more evenly. Even if it ends up going over the foam a little bit, you can see what is going on and you're going to get a straighter line. So I'm just going to clip that together. And then this is the side, this is the top, so that's where we want the sewing to be. Right sides together. And clip. I'm going to use a leader fabric, which is basically just a little scrap of fabric. I'm going to start sewing on there. So if there's any knotted thread or bird's nest, it is going to be on that fabric and not on my project. And this is a 1/4 inch foot. So if I put the edge of this foot with the edge of this fabric, we're going to be sewing with the 1/4 inch seam that we need. Now, when you use leader fabrics, make sure you do remember to go back and forth when you get onto your project so that it knots. I'm going to daisy chain right onto this next one. And I am on the foam very, very slightly. That's fine. You just want to keep your eye on the prize and be a 1/4 inch from that edge. You want to know what really gets on my nerves? When I filmed a whole tutorial and one piece is blurry. My camera above the ironing board decided to focus on my head and my glasses and not on what I was doing. So hopefully you will forgive me. I'm going to walk you through it with photos. So we had sewn the front and the lining together. Now what you're going to do is you're going to put the front down, so the foam side down on the ironing board, and you're going to fold the lining out. You're going to press the seam towards the lining like this. Then you're going to put everything right sides together, so the outside foam units together and the linings together, matching those seams. That's really important. That's the first thing you do, is match those center seams to make sure that gets lined up well. Once you clip those, then you're going to line everything else up, so the front fabrics and the lining fabrics clip all the way around. If you want to, you can use a different color clip to remind you where you need to stop, because you need to leave a section of the lining open about like this so that you can turn it all right side out. Okay, that's what was blurry. Now we're going to get back to the actual video. Thank you for your patience with my technical difficulties. All right, I had a bit of a false start, forgot to hit record. Hate when that happens, so I'm going to pretend I haven't sewn here at all. I'm going to start here and I'm going to be a little more than 1/4 inch from the edge along this bottom of the lining. And you want to make sure you go forward and back so that it is nice and secure for when you turn it right side out. I don't worry about that there because that is going to be on the inside. No one will ever see it. Now, when you get to these seams, you want to make sure they are staying flat and towards the lining, which may require you to use a stiletto or the side of your scissors. Don't poke through your fabric to hold that down to get it under your presser foot. And then as I'm sewing, we have 2 layers of foam, so it's pretty fat here. I usually kind of press down a little bit to help the presser foot. You can see that the needle is mostly to the right of the foam. You might sew through it a little bit, but not very much, and really nothing to worry about. Just keep your focus on having 1/4 inch from that cut edge. Now we are going to clip the corners, and I don't like to clip at a 90-degree angle like this because then you still have quite a bit of fabric that has to fold into that really small part. I like to take 2 cuts. So I come in at more of an angle, and then I'm taking off more of the fabric from the edge. So I come like this, and then like this. But make sure you keep it a little bit away and definitely don't cut your stitching. And then you're going to do the same thing down here. And now we are going to turn this right side out. Feels a little bit different turning something right side out that has the foam in there versus just fabric or fabric and fleece. And I like to use my fingers to get these corners out as best as I can. And then you can take the turning tool, put it in there, and very gently push those corners out so that they're a little more defined and less curved. And then don't forget that you have corners in your lining as well. So now I'm just going to take this to the ironing board and I'm going to iron that flat and then sew straight across to close that. You can use a matching thread if you want to, but it is going to be down in the bottom of this sleeve, never to be seen again. So I'm just going to use white so I don't have to change my thread. Now we just need to push the lining into our book sleeve. You're literally just going to push that and then just use your fingers and get the corners of the lining into the corners of the outside so that that looks nice. There is a little bit extra fabric. It's not going to be completely flat. And now we're going to work on getting this seam on the top edge so that you're not seeing, or you're seeing little to no lining when you're looking at the outside. Usually you have to work the side seams the most because that's usually where there's a bit of extra material. So I usually do it with my fingers and then I will press each of the side seams and press. Now sometimes this will look a little bit wrinkly if your bond isn't really good. We bonded that really, really well. There's no wrinkles. Don't have to worry about that. And now we're going to just go and finish it by top stitching around this edge. You can do 1/4 inch, you can do 1 inch, whatever you want. I usually do about 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and that is going to prevent this lining from completely pulling back out as you are using it and putting things in and out. So you definitely want to stitch around that top edge. Now, because I have an industrial machine, I can't take the arm off and have this wrap around the throat of my machine. So I have to do it a little different than you probably do, and I have to sew from the inside basically. And because I don't have this perfect blue thread, and this has lots of colors on the outside, I've decided to switch to gray, so it will be less noticeable than if I was using white. Now, another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use a piece of painter's tape to help me have a really solid visual for where I want my guide to be. So I want to sew 3/8 of an inch from this edge. And I can just look at these marks, but it's a little bit harder to be holding this open, watching what's going on here, and keeping everything lined up. So I'm going to use a piece of painter's tape. I'm going to put it right on that 3/8 inch mark. Now I had shown in a short another time where I had done this and my tape had gone over this feed dog and it caused a bit of concern. I hadn't actually pushed it down because you don't want to stop your feed dogs from moving, obviously. They were moving under the tape, but I'm going to be much more careful from here on out to make sure I don't put them even on the feed dog. My goal isn't to confuse you, it's just to show you how to sew cool things. Because the bobbin is going to show, we don't want any knots, so we're going to pull up the bobbin thread, and here's how you do that. I have this lined up with the edge of my tape. I'm gonna put my foot down, I'm gonna put my needle down, and I'm going to be holding this top thread while I put my needle down, and then I'm gonna lift the needle again, and give that a little tug, and you can see the bobbin thread coming out. So I'm gonna grab some tweezers and I'm gonna get that thread out. Now I'm going to put both threads under the foot and pull back, and I'm going to hold them as I take a few stitches forward and a few stitches back. And now I'm just going to keep sewing. So with my machine, this is definitely harder than most people. I'm going to be watching this line, making sure the lining is staying in, and just moving it so that we can sew all the way around. Now I always cut these threads before I get back there because I don't want them to create a new kind of a knot. So now it is top stitched all the way around that edge. And now it is done. We just have this really cute padded book sleeve. And this is the smaller one. It's perfect for a mass market book. You can put that in your backpack, carry it, and everything is going to stay nice and tidy. Another thing I love about book sleeves is you can keep them simple or you can dress them up. Like this one, similar fabric, but I put little stripes here, little bands, just to make it a little bit fancier. Use some of my scrap fabric. This one, I put the band of argyle and otherwise just use this fabric. And then remember, in my Etsy shop, I also have patterns for how to do the same thing in 3 sizes with a pocket or with a pocket and a really cute tie closure to close that. So what do you think? Are you ready to whip up a couple of book sleeves? They're so quick and easy, it isn't even funny. They make great gifts. They're also a great seller. So if you are a person that wants to sew and sell, fund a vacation, make an income, this might be something to add to your list. Let me know in the comments what your plans are for book sleeves and if you have a favorite size or if you're going to be doing a variety.